Hello, fellow bibliophiles, and welcome back to Blatantly Bookish. I'm Marissa, and today I'm excited to share some of the Victorian books, both on my shelves and on my e-reader, that are by authors I've never read before and would like to try. I ended up picking this prompt for Victober this year, specifically because I have all of these books that I'm excited about and haven't gotten around to reading yet. A lot of these books and authors I have aren't the major Victorian authors. I think I've pretty much read at least one book by all of the authors that I consider to be the most well-known Victorian writers. And there are still plenty of very well-known Victorian books that I want to get around to reading one day. But the books I'm featuring in this video are specifically slightly more obscure books by authors I haven't read anything by before. The first author I have for you is Emily Eden. I have her books, The Semi-Attached Couple and The Semi-Detached House. I don't know too much about the books in this bind-up. I think that they're both about family life and domesticity in the Victorian era, but what really interests me about this bind-up is the author herself. Emily Eden was a witty, aristocratic spinster. She traveled to India with her brother for 6 years. She hosted morning receptions for the Whig political party, and she was very up-to-date on all of the gossip and politics of her time. And I've heard that Eden's wit in her writing is similar to Jane Austen's. I don't know if people make that comparison simply because they were both spinsters who wrote about similar subject matter, or if Eden's writing is really that good, but I hope to read her works one day and find out. Next up, I have The Children of the New Forest by Captain Marryat. This is a hardcover book, but also it's soft in a lot of ways. It's like really flexible. I think it's an amazing edition, and I'm very excited that I found it at a used book sale. This is a children's novel published in 1847 that takes place right after the English Civil War. It's apparently about 4 children who are orphaned during the war and then hide from soldiers in the New Forest, where they find shelter and live off of the land. It sounds like a really fun piece of historical fiction about a time period I don't read about very often, so it might be really interesting for me. Evidently, this was the last book that Marryat wrote, and was unusual in that it wasn't about the sea or the navy like most of his other books were. Then I have Deerbrook by Harriet Martineau. Deerbrook is about the lives and marriage prospects of 2 sisters who come to live in the village of Deerbrook. I'm told it features the nuances of small village life and all of its gossip, as well as themes of class and marriage. Very much like Emily Eden, I don't know much about Martineau's writing, but I found her background very interesting. She started writing after the death of her father and the failure of their family business, and became internationally known for her contributions on political economy and social commentary. But perhaps most interestingly to me, she was also very good friends with Charlotte Bronte, which makes me want to read her work all the more. Next up, I have Miss Marjoribanks by Margaret Oliphant. This was the group read for Victober a few years ago now, but I never got around to reading it, and I feel like Margaret Oliphant is not a very widely talked about Victorian author. I didn't realize it before, but this is actually the 5th book in a series called The Chronicles of Carlingford, which Oliphant based off of Trollope's Barsetshire Chronicles. I'm not quite sure what this book is about exactly, but I do love the Barsetshire Chronicles. Now, I know that this is part of a series though, so I'm wondering if this is really the best place to start with Margaret Oliphant. Maybe I should read the first book in the series, or I don't know. She also wrote a book called Hester, which I don't think is a part of that series. I think it's a standalone, so perhaps that would be a better place to start. If you're familiar with Margaret Oliphant's writing, I would love your opinions and advice on where to start with her. Then I have East Lynne by Ellen Wood. She was quite prolific and wrote over 30 novels. Her books sold internationally, and she was even more popular and famous than Dickens in Australia. And yet, for some reason, I've never read anything by her before, or even heard of anything she wrote apart from this book, East Lynne. It's a sensation novel about an aristocratic lady who abandons her husband and children for a seducer. It sounds like a really fun and fast-paced book that I can't wait to read one day. Though I do wonder why Ellen Wood was so popular in her time, but not very well known today. Have you heard of her books before or read any of them? Do you have theories as to why her popularity faded so quickly? Or is she a popular Victorian author and I'm just not familiar with her? And then I have some books that I got for free on Kindle that I could potentially read on my e-reader one day. The first of these is The Beetle by Richard Marsh. Marsh is another author, like many of these authors, who was very popular in his day, but is rather unknown today. He wrote almost 80 volumes and loads of shorter fiction as well. His most famous work is The Beetle, which is often compared to Bram Stoker's Dracula, probably because the two works have similar themes and subject matter, and were released in the same year. The Beetle was actually initially more popular than Dracula, and sold more copies. The Beetle is about a shape-shifting foreigner who tries to get revenge on a member of British Parliament through the means of hypnosis and mesmerism. I haven't read Dracula in a really long time, and I think it could be interesting to one day read the two together and analyze their similar Victorian themes. Next, there is Mary Cholmondeley, who wrote Red Pottage and The Danvers Jewels and Sir Charles Danvers. This is another famous and successful British novelist from the time period who I think isn't talked about or read much at all today. Red Pottage was a bestseller when it was released, and it was really the title that caught my attention. I don't know why, but it sounds so delicious and appealing to me. All I know about it is that it's about female friendship, and I think that one of the friends is actually a novelist. Apparently, it was quite scandalous when it was published in 1899 due to themes of adultery and a break with traditional female domestic values, as well as its satirism of clergy. And I should probably have included this next author far earlier on this list. Kate Howe has talked about her for a long time, and I've been meaning to read something by her for ages. And that, of course, is Charlotte Mary Yonge. I would love to read her work for the first time at some point. I have e-copies of The Heir of Redcliffe, The Daisy Chain, and The Little Duke, but I'm not sure where the best place to start with this author is. And Kate Howe's recommendation alone is enough for me to want to read this author, but Charlotte Mary Yonge's work was also highly admired by a lot of famous Victorian authors, such as Lewis Carroll, George Eliot, Christina Rossetti, Tennyson, and Anthony Trollope. And last but not least, I have an e-copy of H. Rider Haggard's Allan Quatermain. Haggard wrote adventure books set in faraway places and actually lived in South Africa himself for a number of years. Allan Quatermain is actually part of a series, and it's not the first book in that series, so I should probably actually look for an e-copy of the first book in that series, which is King Solomon's Mines. It's about the character Allan Quatermain, who goes on an adventure through South Africa to find treasure in King Solomon's mines. It's apparently thought to be one of the first books of the Lost World genre, which is a subgenre of the late Victorian adventure romance. It's all about Westerners discovering the remnants and architecture of lost civilizations, like Egyptian tombs and Mayan temples. I'm a little hesitant to pick up this book because I think that it'll be incredibly dated and racist, and might have a lot of problematic messages about colonialism and imperialism and empire. But who knows, it could surprise me. And personally, I feel like there's some value in reading something like that through a more critical and historical lens, to acknowledge and learn about the historical viewpoints, but also push back on them from a modern perspective. I first heard about this book by reading the comic series The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen by Alan Moore, which is all about literary characters, mostly, if not all, from Victorian literature, who are recruited for a spy mission by the mysterious leader of Britain's MI5. So there's a recently divorced Miss Murray from Dracula, Hyde from Jekyll and Hyde, the Invisible Man from H.G. Wells's book by the same title, and this character, Allan Quatermain. I think there might have been one or two more characters that I can't quite remember right now, but it's a really fun book full of literary references. It might be a nice read for you when Victober is over, as it deals with lots of Victorian themes like opium addiction, imperialism, and Britain's influence on other cultures. It also deals with respectability and women's treatment in society. And now I'm just going off on a tangent, but that is where I did first hear of H. Rider Haggard. So that's all I have for you right now. I hope you enjoyed hearing about some of these lesser-known Victorian authors that I have yet to try. Many of them were actually very popular and prolific authors in their day, so maybe they're better known than I realize. If so, do let me know. And some of them might actually be pretty well known on BookTube, even if they aren't generally popular nowadays. All the same, I hope you enjoyed hearing about some Victorian authors other than the classic Dickens, Hardy, Trollope, Gaskell, the Brontes, etc. And I wonder if you've heard of these authors before. If you have read their works, where do you think is a good place to start with these authors? Are there other books by some of these authors that you loved that I didn't mention? And if you haven't heard of them before, are there any books I talked about that you're excited to add to your TBR? Are there any obscure Victorian authors or books that you'd like to recommend to me? Obviously, this list isn't meant to be comprehensive, but this is just a few that I have access to right now. And now that I think about it, maybe there are a few more I should have added, like Jill by Amy Dillwyn, which I still hope to get to this Victober, or Olive by Dinah Mullet-Craik, which I started at some point last year, but I never finished because I found it really triggering while pregnant. But anyway, I've already rambled on for far too long, so I look forward to seeing you in another bookish video very soon. Bye!